Greetings, one and all. Chris Courtney here, New Pragmatic. Thank you so much for taking a moment out of your day. In this short video, I'm going to be going through CSS Grid and how to properly structure your files to take advantage of all the things that this powerful tool can do for you. I'm going to be using a CodePen file called CSS Bowie, which will be linked with this video. In this file, there are a collection of images, and I'm going to be adding some information about each album with the file. This is not an attempt to like redesign a Spotify or anything. This is simply giving us some assets to work with so that we can manipulate this data with CSS Grid. The first thing that I want to do is I want to look at basically how the image tag is working just on its own. And as you can see, as I move the window in and out, the albums are filling the space that is available in this browser window that's over here to the right. However, if I wanted to access all the power that comes with CSS Grid, I could do that really easily just by wrapping these images in a section tag. When I call display grid on the section tag, not a lot occurs. And that's because we haven't given it any parameters beyond the fact that I want CSS Grid to be associated with the section. If I want it to actually begin to use CSS Grid to immediately organize the information that's here, I have some more work to do. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to call grid template columns. There's a number of ways that I can assign values to these columns. And if we go over here to MDN, what we'll see is under the grid template columns listing on Mozilla Developer Network, we can see there's a few demos of how you could typically relate information with that. But here in the syntax, you get a list of all the possible values and combinations that you could put into and associate with grid template columns. For our purposes, I'm going to start by simply just saying 100 pixels, 100 pixels. One of the things you'll notice right away is it appears that our images are now just overlapping one another. A quick way that we can deal with that is if we just say image tag with 100%. And what that's done is it's basically told the image, I want you to be 100% the width of whatever container you happen to be in. And in CSS Grid, it happens to basically go through and make a bunch of individual containers around the items, the children, if you will, that are within that parent element. So the parent element here is the section, and the children are the images that are currently listed there. A much more flexible way to look at this space, though, is to look at it as a fraction of the total available space. So a fractional unit is denoted by the FR. And as you can see now, just by changing that to 1FR, it's now made the album the entire width of the screen. And it will get larger as I go up, and as you can see, and as I go down, it gets smaller. Okay, so if I came in here and I said 1FR, 1FR, that makes it a 2-column design, and it of course gets larger and smaller as we go. If I added another, obviously that makes it a 3-column design. There is a more eloquent way to write this, as you can see here in the developer notes. You could use this repeat syntax. So here it says repeat 3 200 pixels. Now repeat 3 200 pixels, what that's saying is I want 3 columns, and I want that to be at 200 pixels each. And as you can see now in the space, it's broken. And it's broken because this design is wider than the available space on the screen. And as I go up, you can see it doesn't fill out because it's set to a hard permanent size. But if I sub that out and I say 1FR instead, you'll see that now becomes responsive, and scalable, which is great. That's exactly what I would hope that a fraction would do. Basically, if you think about this, this is 33%, 33%, and 33%, or the 33 and a third. If I wanted to make this really easy on us, I'll make it 4 columns, and now that is clearly 25% each. That isn't the only way that we can set our columns. We could set these columns to have different widths. So now this is the classic 66%, 33%, or if I wanted to make it 75-25, I could. So here's 75-25, and you'll see that the depth is holding to whatever the depth of the larger column is. So there's this dead space that's now injected, or white, or empty space. It's not really dead. Maybe that's the design that you want. You can also flip this around really easily, and it gives you some options. We're going to go into more of the creative side of what we can do with spacing and CSS Grid when we get into grid template areas. That is the CSS prints tutorial. The CSS Bowie tutorial is basically looking at responsive structures. Now, the one thing that I want to do is I want to make sure that we have a structure that's going to work for mobile devices. So I'm going to say 2-1FR, and I've got to remember to have the comment in there, and that gives me a 2-column design. Okay, and this I'm really focused on basically a screen like that. The other thing that I want to do is I want to make sure I have some space in between these elements, and that's really easy to gain access to. It's simply grid gap. And grid gap, I can't use something like 1FR. That's not a concept here. What I could do is I could come through and say 10 pixels. And that puts a gap in between all of the elements. You can see that it doesn't really address the outside, but it does address the inside. So for this section, if I wanted there to be some space to the outside, that would be very easy to do with just some traditional padding. Say padding 10 pixels, and that gives me the padding to the outside. As I stated before, this isn't just about the images that we have on screen. It's also about data that's going to need to write along with those images. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to insert that information into the design. So that inserts the album title and the year that the album came out. It came out a long time ago, 1972. But something odd has happened here. It's now lined up the album title underneath the debut album and the year underneath the Ziggy Stardust album. What's happening here? Well, what's occurring here is CSS Grid is applying itself to all the children elements in the section tag that we have here. Well, the problem is those images are all child elements of the section tag, but so is that H2 and the H4. So what we actually need to do is we need to restructure the design here so that the image, the H2 and the H4 are a unit that is then a child element of the section tag, and remove those as individual elements or individual children of the section tag. So let's do that now. And now what you see is we have a unit that is holding together, it's responsive, the typography is staying with the album. You'll also notice that it made a gap here underneath the associated album to the left, and that's because the depth maintains whatever the maximum depth is for that particular row. And if we wanted to set a particular depth here for this, we could simply call grid template rows, and we could say 500 pixels, and that would set the depth for that column to be 500 pixels. The rest, you'll notice, are automatically set. That is just the way that grid template rows functions. You can see how it functions here. Grid template rows by default uses an auto syntax, which basically says just whatever size the content is, no matter how much content there is, replicate that all the way down. You can also use the FR, the fractional. There is a 1FR, 2FR, 1FR. The problem there is you do have to set that for each rows. So if I said 1FR, 2FR, 1FR, you see that it gives the extra space to the second rows, and then it falls right back to the auto usage. So if you go over the number of rows that you've declared a value for, it will snap right back to auto. A really easy way to sort that out would be to use repeat, as we've seen before. Repeat works well here, and we could say we have 5 here, and then we could say 300 pixels, and that now sets a size for all of them. So they all have a similar gap. You could also say 1FR, and that changes the design ever so slightly. We will come back to grid template rows. It's not something we necessarily know if we need or don't need, so I'm going to delete that out. Our next step is to pull in all the content. And to save us some time, I'm going to structure everything in a similar format that reflects what we've already walked through to this point. So I've pulled all that content over, and as you can see, I have a div wrapping around each image, each album title, each year of release, and then that div closes, essentially making each of these divs the true children of the section tag. For sake of making it easy for us to see, I'm going to go ahead and close those divs so that we can just see the album that's associated with it. There, that makes it a little easier for us to actually see what's going on. The next thing that I want to do is I want to address a problem that we have with our design. It works fantastic for mobile. You could even get away with just saying the 1FR if you were on a particularly small phone. However, as you go up, this design doesn't work so well, and that's because it isn't responsive. While the information responds to the window that we have, it doesn't respond very well past that. So I want to leverage media queries to really unlock the true potential of CSS Grid. As I stated earlier, we're starting with a mobile-first mentality. So with that in mind, the first media query that we write, I want it to focus on creating a design that is going to impact everything outside of the mobile sphere. When we start thinking about tablet design, I want to go ahead and adjust this to be a 3-column design. So with that in mind, I'm going to use that repeat syntax that we've seen before. And now we have a 3-column design that will hold well for a tablet, but it will kick back to a 2-column design for the mobile device. Is this 3-column design really what we want to see for a desktop? Probably not. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and create another media query here that's going to be focused on widths that are north of the tablet device. The iPad is 768. I'm just going to go ahead and target 800, and I will switch to a 4-column design for anything that's larger than a tablet. We'll go ahead and save this, and as we move out, you can see now we're in a 4-column design. For tablets, we're in a 3-column design, and for mobile devices, we're in a 2-column design. We start with a design that is focused on mobile, and then we adjust northward from there. While this first album is David Bowie, we don't necessarily know who these other albums are by because it's just the album title. We're going to need to come in and add a title to this page. Now, as we stated before, what happens when you have a child element inside of the section is it's going to just naturally carve off an area of space right there. So if I said David Bowie studio albums, I could obviously adjust the design here a bit and say, all right, well, let's make it 5 rem. But I still would rather have that be above the design. So to do that, I actually need to come out and think about moving this outside of the section. And the problem that we get into there is we have some padding issues that are missing. I want to put this inside of the section like it was before. And then I simply want to create a div that will wrap the Bowie albums. And we'll give that a class of Bowie albums. And instead of applying this to the section will keep the padding. We do need that padding there for the section, but I'll pull everything else away and I'll put this on Bowie albums. And there now we have that grid that's established for Bowie albums, and we'll just replace section down here with Bowie albums as well. And now what we have is we have a responsive design that functions well for our various sizes. I will say that H1 is a bit large. So what I think would be a good idea to do here would be to adjust that back down for mobile, and then we'll come back and we'll adjust that H1 up. So now that we've made that adjustment to the media query, we can stretch that out, and you see that our text size changes, our album grid is responsive, and we have a nice responsive design that was relatively easy to pull off. Without display grid, grid template column, and grid gap, this design falls apart. But with it, you unlock so much useful power. A great question that I've gotten in the past about CSS Grid is, what's the support like? I would encourage you to continue using sites like Can I Use and searching the CSS properties that you're interested in using. In this particular case, CSS Grid, as you can see, it has fantastic support really across the board. But look at this, 90% can use it. That's a lot of users. So with that, I'm Chris Courtney. Thank you so much for joining me for this short tutorial on CSS Grid. If you like this video, click the subscribe button below. Thanks a lot.